and I'll wait for what I think is the best moment in between the waves to cut in.
To have you try and cut right in front of this boat that's doing 4.5 knots.
Bad out there right now. I'm not gonna hurt nobody to get an extra 10 ponds.
Just now, in the dark depths of the northern seas, the crew of the Wizard found themselves in a terrifying standoff, miles from any land. As fuel ran low and the storm intensified, the captain's sharp commands cut through the howling wind, urging his crew to face dangerous operations. But can they navigate through what lies ahead, especially with the super typhoon Nori looming on the horizon? Prepare yourself as we venture into the storm, where each revelation pushes the boundaries of what you thought possible. Maritime nightmare beyond the horizon. In the thick fog of the cold northern seas, the crew of the Wizard found themselves facing a serious challenge. Their ship was over 350 miles away from land, pushing through rough waves, while their fuel consumption had reached a concerning rate of 900 pounds per hour. With time running out, they had just 20 minutes to execute a crucial maneuver. As the captain held onto the cold railing, he looked into the thick fog. Suddenly, a large shadow appeared in front. The radar alarm sounded. They were not only battling the sea, but something huge was moving under the water, waking up from a long sleep. As the team braced for the task ahead, tension filled the air. The silence was broken by the captain's calm yet urgent orders, signaling the beginning of a difficult operation. They knew precision was key. One crew member couldn't help but express disbelief at the situation, realizing how critical the upcoming task was. However, their attempt to secure the catch quickly turned dangerous when the machinery suddenly stopped working mid-operation. The hydraulic system, essential for lifting the heavy pot, malfunctioned. The pot, suspended in the air, swung wildly, creating a very real threat to the crew and the ship. Fear spread through the team as they rushed to bring the situation under control, knowing that a single misstep could lead to disaster. In the middle of the chaos, hydraulic oil began to spill across the deck, making the surface slippery and hazardous. The ship rocked violently as the storm intensified, further complicating the situation. The captain, understanding how critical things had become, quickly shifted to the backup power system in an attempt to regain control. Unfortunately, the damage to the ship was severe. A crucial seal in the hydraulic system had broken, spraying oil over the generator. This caused a short circuit, leaving the ship without power and casting the crew into total darkness. Despite their nerves, the crew stayed focused, following the captain's firm orders to secure the deck and assess the damage. Down below, the engine room was a scene of frantic activity as they worked to clean the oil-covered generator and replace essential filters. The team knew that restoring power was their only hope of stabilizing the ship and getting back on track. After what felt like an eternity, the backup generator finally began to hum back to life. The crew quickly replaced the broken hydraulic seal, hoping it would hold. It was hard to believe that a small part, costing less than $100, had become the key to saving their multi-million-dollar operation. With the tension rising, the captain took a deep breath and restarted the generator, silently willing it to work. The lights flickered back on and the crew erupted in relieved cheers.
Auxiliary for hydraulics. We gotta get this gear on. Last thing we need is problems.
The generator had been restored and the new seal was holding strong. The immediate crisis was over, and for the first time in hours, the crew allowed themselves to feel a sense of relief. They wouldn't need to make the costly and time-consuming trip back to port for repairs. However, they knew time was still working against them, as much of their crab catch remained in the water. Now, with the ship once again steady and systems back online, the crew of the Wizard faced the daunting task of catching up on the lost time. Though tired, they were buoyed by their small victory. Still, the journey was far from over, and they knew that the unpredictable waters of the Northern Sea had more challenges in store. For now, they have overcome one hurdle, but the future remains uncertain. As the ocean roared loudly, huge waves crashed against the boat, threatening to cause chaos with every hit. Pots that had been tied down tightly were now sliding across the deck. Their ropes snapped, creating loud, clanging noises as metal hit wood. Amid this chaos, one crew member realized how bad their situation was as everything on board slid uncontrollably. The family on the boat was tense, holding on to anything solid as the boat moved forward at just 1 knot, struggling against the strong ocean currents. Desperation filled the air, pushing the boat on, hoping for any sign of progress. Quiet prayers were whispered for strength, hoping they could make it past the ridge that seemed to be getting closer. Slowly, the storm began to calm down. The waves hit the boat with less force, giving them a small sense of hope that they might escape the worst of the storm. Feeling a sense of urgency, they pushed the boat to full speed, eager to leave the terrifying storm behind. For a moment, they felt relief, but the reality of how risky their journey had been stayed with them, reminding them that they weren't out of danger yet. But the worst was still ahead. On the horizon, they could see the huge super typhoon Nori, a powerful storm that would soon make the sea even more dangerous. Captain Sig Hansen gathered his crew for one final push to bring in their crab pots before the storm hit. As the storm grew stronger, the captain watched the waves rise higher, making everything more difficult and dangerous. The crew struggled to handle the equipment in the rough conditions, with pots slipping dangerously on the deck. During one huge wave, a pot nearly hit a crew member, leading to urgent shouts for everyone to watch out. After each close call, they quickly checked for injuries, and one crew member held his arm, describing the pain like sharp needles shooting through it. But things were about to get worse. Another crew member started feeling weak and numb, showing signs of going into shock. The captain, hearing about this, demanded updates on his condition, ready to take any steps needed to keep him safe. Through all of this, the crew stayed determined. They weren't just battling the physical challenges, but also the constant, unforgiving force of the sea. It was a harsh reminder of how tough and relentless nature could be, testing their courage and strength at every turn. With renewed hope but wary of the looming threats, the crew prepared to face the next chapter of their daunting sea journey. A crew's race to respond. Soon after, he mentioned feeling pain from his shoulder down to his arm, and this set off immediate concern. Everyone knew what needed to be done right away. Raise his feet, keep him awake, and help him stay calm by guiding him to breathe regularly. At the same time, someone had to contact the Coast Guard because it looked like he might be going into shock or having a seizure. As things got more intense, he was asked to focus on simple tasks, like counting fingers held up in front of him so they could check how alert he was. The crew watched closely, checking his vital signs. His pulse and blood pressure were the main things to monitor. But this wasn't the worst part. As his condition got worse, the crew quickly reached out to the Coast Guard, explaining that he might be dehydrated, going into shock, or even having convulsions. They described how he seemed out of it and made sure to give him both water and drinks with electrolytes, like Gatorade, in hopes of improving his condition. Meanwhile, up on the deck, the day took another bad turn. Another crew member, Miles, got hurt while working with some equipment. His nose was bleeding badly, making the situation even more chaotic. The crew quickly put their first aid skills to use, trying to stop the bleeding and figure out if he needed stitches, working with the little medical knowledge and supplies they had on board. In the face of these challenges, the crew stuck together, showing just how resilient they could be. They supported each other through all the unpredictable and tough situations they faced out at sea. In the middle of the chaos, Zach suggested they start at one end since the cover seemed to be opening that way. But before they could act, something went wrong. He found himself in the worst place at the worst time, feeling confused and dizzy. They had to keep a close eye on him for signs of a concussion, manage the bleeding, and prevent shock. On top of that, they had to start antibiotics because he had an open cut on his face, something that often happens with fish poisoning. At the same time, on the boat Ewan Ballot, Captain Jerry Tilley was fighting against massive 40-foot waves and winds of 60 miles per hour. Fishing was out of the question, so the crew stayed below deck for safety. Captain Jerry stayed focused, steering through the huge waves when out of nowhere, a massive wave as tall as a 5-story building hit the boat. This 100-foot wave tipped the 100-foot fishing boat on its side and caused the engines to fail for a moment due to sudden oil pressure loss. But that wasn't the worst part. The crew had to deal with a power failure, leaving them with no way to steer. In the chaos, the boat managed to straighten itself and Captain Jerry restarted the engine and got the power back. Below deck, the crew, who had been thrown from their beds by the giant wave, started checking the ship for damage. Nicole, the captain's daughter, had been hurt when the wave threw her into a cabinet. She couldn't bend her arm, but thankfully she wasn't seriously injured. The wave had not only hurt the crew, but it also badly damaged parts of the boat. The wheelhouse and kitchen were hit hard. The sorting table on deck was flipped over, and part of the deck had been torn open. Meanwhile, north of Dutch Harbor, another boat, Time Bandit, was heading into freezing waters and rough seas. The crew saw another fisherman in a dangerous spot, trying to secure some equipment on deck as giant waves crashed around him. He was way too close to the water, and the Time Bandit crew was nervous, finishing their shift with deep worry about his safety. The boat rocked violently, and the man grabbed onto the rails, almost touching the freezing water. Then he disappeared. But the danger wasn't over yet. The Time Bandit crew quickly jumped into action. They raced to throw him a life ring while the captain, Jonathan, carefully steered closer to save him from the icy sea. As the boat returns to help the struggling fishermen, the crew quickly jumps into action, pulling the men from the freezing water. The skipper, with a mix of urgency and relief, radios to confirm that they've successfully rescued everyone. One of the men is in shock but awake, though his voice is shaky, but the danger isn't over yet. Josh, clearly shaken by what happened, is at risk of hypothermia because his limbs are numb. The crew knows they need to warm him up slowly to avoid sending him into shock. They carefully remove his wetsuit and move him to a warmer part of the boat. Josh, still trying to make sense of what happened, starts to talk about how he fell into the water. The deck was icy and he lost his grip while working, barely managing to hold onto a chain to save himself. While they tend to him, drying him off and making sure he's okay, Josh's mind drifts to the end of the fishing season in Seattle. He's looking forward to being done, but he's also confused by a persistent pain that won't go away, wondering aloud what might be causing it. At first, Josh brushes off the pain, thinking it's just a muscle cramp or maybe he slept wrong. But the fact that it isn't getting better starts to worry the crew. They suspect it could be something more serious. As they prepared for the next challenge, the crew's resilience was to be tested once more. The dangerous rescue of Sig. And then things start to take a turn for the worse. As Josh's condition seems to deteriorate, the crew grows more concerned. Realizing how serious the situation might be, they start thinking about heading directly to a clinic. Each minute that passes makes them more anxious about Josh's health. Edgar and Nick hurried behind the paramedics who were moving Sig as quickly as possible to the airport. Time was running out, and they needed to arrange a medical evacuation because the local clinic wasn't prepared for such a serious situation. The sense of urgency was clear. One of the paramedics mentioned how difficult this season had been, with his condition far beyond what the small clinic could handle. Soon, he would be flown more than 800 miles to Anchorage, where a heart specialist was waiting. The helicopter was already prepared, its blades spinning rapidly, ready to get him to safety. As they worked to keep him stable, the sound of the helicopter filled the air, adding to the heavy sense of worry that surrounded them. Meanwhile, the Coast Guard had been called in to assist with the rescue. Their helicopter, an MH-6 Jayhawk, faced strong headwinds of over 30 knots, making the situation even more challenging. The crew had a short window to complete the mission, only 20 minutes to lower a rescue swimmer, secure him, and get him into the helicopter before they would run low on fuel. The ship's deck was rocking violently as waves crashed against it. The rough seas made it difficult for the crew to stay steady, and each wave brought the risk of delaying the operation. Someone shouted to be heard over the roaring wind as the pressure of the situation grew. Every second counted, and it felt like the weather was working against them. But this wasn't the most challenging part. A massive wave suddenly rose, threatening to disrupt the entire mission. The crew watched in disbelief as the towering water nearly stopped them in their tracks. The pilot, however, managed to keep control of the helicopter, steering it through the turbulent air. Below, the rescue team prepared for a difficult extraction, knowing they were pushing the limits of safety. As the helicopter hovered above the deck, the Coast Guard communicated with careful precision. The situation was tense, and they knew that if the weather got any worse, they would have no choice but to abort the rescue. Their fuel reserves were running low, and time was slipping away faster than they had planned. Just when it seemed like everything might fall apart, the rescue swimmer made it down onto the unstable deck. It was a moment of skill and bravery, and everyone watching felt a mix of relief and amazement as the swimmer landed amidst the chaos. It was a brief pause in the tension, a reminder of the strength and courage that the team had to summon. But the real challenge still loomed. After finally securing Sig for the airlift, the weight of the mission hit them. One of the team members couldn't help but reflect on how it felt like they were living through a scene from a movie. but the danger they were in was all too real. The seriousness of the situation began to settle in, and the pressure of what they were doing grew even heavier. With Sig now safely aboard, the helicopter turned back toward safety. Every minute mattered as they watched their fuel levels drop. The mission had become a race against not just time, but the powerful forces of nature and the limits of human endurance. What they had gone through was more than just a rescue. It was a testament to survival and the courage it took to face such a relentless and unforgiving sea. Francis looked sharp as he took his place, but the rescue swimmer stayed on duty. The scene was impressive as the helicopter flew right by the tall crane, coming so close it seemed almost planned. People watching were amazed, with some even cheering and clapping as the pilot waved and flew past. It was a sight to remember. Meanwhile, inside the helicopter, everyone was starting to worry about Francis. He was clearly in pain, but he tried his best to move and stay warm even though the weather was rough. A splash of cold water from the co-pilot's actions soaked his sleeping bag, but Francis appreciated how hard the crew was working to keep him safe. The rescue team wasn't slowing down, and this mission was turning out to be one of their toughest yet. Everyone knew how serious things were, and they stayed focused. The team leader, who was clearly impressed by how skilled the pilot was and how well the crew worked together, shared his gratitude over the radio. Francis was in good hands, and the helicopter was already on its way back to Dutch Harbor. They had plenty of fuel left, showing how efficient and quick the team had been. Together, under all that pressure, their work was truly heroic. As they flew back, the team knew there were still challenges ahead. Did you feel the icy thrill of the northern seas with the crew of the Wizard? What's next for them as they face the looming super typhoon Nori? Like, subscribe, and share your predictions below.